Celtics Stuff Live.
Celtics Stuff Live on CLNS Media, the online home for all things Boston sports and especially the Boston Celtics. I'm your host, Justin Poulin. Joining me, John Duke. I'm in parts unknown, John. I know you love to say that. Traveling, but we are recording. We're getting much, much closer to the NBA draft, really just about a week and a half away. We'll have a show next Sunday. Then we'll be recording, or not recording, we'll be broadcasting live on draft night. Details to be announced. Obviously, we're going to try to line up some guests. And the finals wasn't looking real good for Cleveland and LeBron, but that's really was the case last year. I think Kevin Durant was brought in to make sure that they don't surrender yet another 3-0 lead to the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James dominating. LeBron's been great, John, and I know we're going to talk about Fultz and the draft and the rumors about Sacramento trying to get him in for a workout. We'll get to all those things, but by the time we talk again next Sunday, you got to think that the NBA Finals are going to be all wrapped up.
I got to think so. I mean, look, I think you and I were in league on where this series was going to go. I had a lot of friends who probably were a little bit more optimistic about Cleveland. I think that what we've seen, though, and prepare to be for me to sound like an idiot, but I think what we've seen is that Cleveland, as good as they were against the Celtics, they gave way too many opportunities for the Celtics to make shots, and they're just not good enough at making shots. And when you put that in the hands of Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, forget about it. You know, it's all done. Bada bing, bada boom. I'm saying this on the decade anniversary of the end of The Sopranos. Did you see the theme there? So just
bada bing, bada boom. No doubt. It's funny. I talked about The Sopranos today with a buddy of mine because we were listening to old school 80s over the weekend. He had his bachelor party. He came down to visit me in Pennsylvania. He was a lifelong Mainer, as are you, and I was until about 8 or 9 years ago. He comes down and we're listening to old school 80s music, and what do we listen to but Journey? And so I did not know that nice fact about The Sopranos, but we immediately go, this makes me think of the last episode of The Sopranos, which was hilarious.
I want some onion rings, and I'm I'm a much better parallel parker than Meadow Soprano. I just want that to be very clear there. Anyway, we got way off topic. Look, Cavs are good. Cavs are a good team. We talked a lot with Ryan Bernardoni on our last show about the future and what is it, where are things headed, and there's somewhat bleak future in the very near future, looking at where the Golden State Warriors are. But I think this week is a great signal to show how fickle the future can be as an NBA mistress. And, you want to go back to the 86 Celtics. Let's go back to the 93 Bulls. Let's go back to the 08 Celtics or the 03 Lakers. All these teams seemed like they could run this for years and years and years. And yet over and over and over again, we see situations where teams fall apart for a number of reasons, whether it's injuries or, Len Bias's untimely passing or, Shaq and Kobe decide they hate each other. I mean, I think it's Camp Kumbaya over there on the Bay in Oakland. But let's be honest. Anything could happen, and the luxury repeater tax is going to be a real problem for them to keep Clay, and we saw that, and that's going to come down the pike in a couple of years. It's not next year. It's not immediate, but we also saw this week some word about maybe there's a chance that LeBron's looking elsewhere. So the future in the Eastern Conference might be a tad brighter than what we thought even 7 days ago. Is it a small shot? Maybe, but I think there is a bit more optimism than perhaps we laid out on the table for you in our last show last weekend.
Well, and it's also another sort of don't give up all your chips and go full rebuild yet, but also don't mortgage what the rebuild provides as an opportunity down line as well. So I do see that at some point you sort of have to roll with the young guys, but as far as you can delay that and hold on to players that have serious value. I mean, obviously, Isaiah Thomas is the big one, right? That's the one we all have our eyes on. But as we look at this draft, the idea of going all in, I still wouldn't do that because, like you said, while things can change very quickly, the odds are that it's going to be a tough path to a championship in the next 2 to 3 years. One other thing, though, maybe not as bleak like you said, but what if, and this is the last show we'll be able to really talk about this, I think, but what if Cleveland came back yet again for the second year in a row, despite the fact that Kevin Durant was brought in to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, believe me, I've got less than 1% odds on this. It's really just kind of entertaining a what-if scenario, because if Golden State gets this championship like it really looks like they will, you'll never have this conversation again. They get this championship, it's done. They've achieved the goal. They're happy to have Kevin Durant. Maybe they get challenged a little bit along the way, but until they wind up dealing with salary cap issues, it's really a non-factor, right? So the conversation really can't be had again. Do you think Kevin Durant will get out of town if that were to happen?
Oh man. I don't know what it is that Kevin Durant for you just brings out. I don't know what it is.
Raises.
Things go to a whole new level when you bring up Kevin Durant.
He ruined my 4th of July weekend. I don't know how many times I have to tell you that, right? Like Al Horford was like, 4th of July rules, right? And then Kevin Durant does his thing, and I'm like, I freaking hate this holiday now. And it's my parents' anniversary, so, you know, that it's just, it's salt in the wound every time we talk about this guy. No, but seriously, do you think he would leave? He has the option to opt out. I think he's happy there. I think you're right about the kumbaya, but that's a lot to face, and certainly they think they would get it next year. But that's a storyline that's hard to come back from in for the Warriors.
I think before last year, I would say you're probably right. I would find it hard to believe that would happen. But just in how quickly the emotions swung from the Warriors being down 3-1 to the Thunder, and then turning that around, and then the same happened with the Warriors and the Cavs just 2 or 3 weeks later. I think the fact that sort of thing went down, there's no telling what could be possible. I mean, anything could happen at that point. I don't think it's likely, but
highly unlikely. It's almost not worth talking about. It is highly unlikely.
But it's the same sort of conventional wisdom that brought you Durant's definitely going to come back, and he's definitely he could get more money and blah, blah, blah. Like, where did that conventional wisdom go? Right out the freaking window on July 4, right? I mean, dude, it was, things happened. I had a good chat with a friend of mine about, we were playing off the whole, this is the 30th anniversary of, or 31st anniversary of Ferris Bueller's Day Off being released in theaters. And we're doing lines back and forth, and it's the Ferris line, life moves pretty fast sometimes, right? If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you just might miss it. And we gotta stop around and look at things happen really fast in the NBA nowadays. Things change on a dime. And it's even, what seemed like a short spell for the KG Celtics. That's a long spell when you go back and look at what happened with the LeBron Heat or the LeBron Cavs when they're in contention. And now who knows with the LeBron Cavs in phase 2. It just seems like the window is shorter and shorter and shorter for these teams. And could it be that Durant would look? I can't imagine it, but he's got to feel good about what's going on in Boston too. I mean, that is such a positive experience. Imagine what those Eastern Conference Finals would have looked like with Kevin Durant on the Celtics sideline and
a healthy Isaiah, because of the fact that he wouldn't have had to had all that wear and tear shouldering the scoring load all season long. Don't think for a second. I mean, I'm sure maybe they'll say it's a fluke injury, what happened with the hip, but let's just look at the minutes and what he was doing in the fourth quarter of every single game. The fact that he was the one that had to carry the scoring load. He could never take a night off or reduced minutes. That stuff adds up, and it finally caught up to him in the postseason when you're going extra specially hard. So, yeah, absolutely. That Eastern Conference Finals, I think, would have looked way different with Kevin Durant and Green. And I think I told you last year I wouldn't even consider welcoming him after that decision. But, if you're telling me I have to choose between Gordon Hayward and Kevin Durant, come on.
Well, I don't know. I mean, do you want to go be with somebody who's going to just turn around and leave you at the altar
See,
again?
I love you. I love how you flip the script.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's yes. 100 times out of 100 times, you take Kevin Durant, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
I do.
That's
the argument for why he's not going to leave Golden State, regardless of the unlikely outcome that they might drop for the second year in a row, a 3-0 series lead. Extremely unlikely, but let's talk a little bit about Gordon Hayward then. It's a nice simple transition here.
Ooh-wee.
I know, like literally right before we start recording, a nice little nugget. We dig a little bit this time of year, right up until maybe
That's
not
right.
normally, but the fact that there's the number 1 overall pick, unless there's a rumor to be moving that pick, and we'll get to Markelle Fultz in a minute and his visit to the Celtics, but very likely Markelle Fultz going to be a Celtic. So let's talk about Gordon Hayward a little bit. And it is not lost on me before we move on, the fact that even though you told Sam Sheehan that he's kind of the one that keeps us connected to pop culture, you've already referenced in less than 10 minutes The Sopranos and Ferris Bueller's Day Off with nuggets of release dates and the end of the series. Like I'm just going to say, John, I think since Sam was on the show 2 weeks ago, I think you've decided to up your game.
I've upped my game. I'm nervous. I feel like I got Bobby Manning warming up in the bullpen on me here. I got to be ready. We get Sam Sheehan, doing some good work there in AAA. He's got a pseudonym and everything. It's a hard work to stay here in the high paying world of podcast hosting. But, here we are. So it doesn't matter how many years you've been in the game, man. You gotta work hard to stay on top.
I like it. You're still way ahead of me. So if anybody's getting cut, you're already outpacing me. Bobby's the one breathing on my neck. That's what's going on. Let's be real.
Bobby and Sam are gonna be taking over Celtics Stuff Live. There's gonna be a KG trade. You and I are gonna go out to the Brooklyn Nets Stuff Live, and they'll get 3 number 1s, and it's gonna be terrible. Nick's gonna sell us off.
We'll sign Vin Baker too, and try to figure out how to get out of his contract.
Good old Vin.
Hey, all right. So, what's the juice on Gordon Hayward? Let's dive into this a little bit, because you gave me a very little briefer right before we start the show. So let's do it.
Yeah. So here's the deal, right? So anybody who's been following me on Twitter for the last year, I've gotten a little, and especially this season, I've gotten a little nutty on the Hayward love. Okay, it's not right. I'm starting to grow my hair out so I can do the hair thing like he's got. I mean, really, it's a real single white female situation. Anyway, so what's going on here is that a couple reports this week. One is crazy, and we'll get to that last. The first one is Mark Stein. Mark Stein reports that Gordon Hayward is going to that the Jazz are worried that not only could he go to Boston, but also Miami is a serious contender. So this is nothing new in part. We knew that Miami was going to be looking hard at him. We didn't know that the Jazz were concerned with him. Going along with that, we had Quinn Snyder interviewed by Adrian Wojnarowski earlier in the week, and it really kind of laid off a bit of a vibe of, hey, he may choose to leave here for reasons other than basketball. So putting 2 and 2 together, I'm thinking, okay, well, does he like the beach? This took a deep dive for me that seemed just borderline on you need a restraining order from this guy, because I did a deep dive on Robin Hayward. That's Gordon's wife's Instagram account. I'm trying to figure out, is she from Miami? Like, why would they be interested in Miami over Boston? Didn't find anything, but, ladies and gentlemen, anyone who's on Twitter tonight can know and does understand, there was a post about a half hour ago from when we're recording this. Robin Hayward puts up a picture of their daughter, Gordon and her daughter, on Instagram with a shirt on her back that says, "Go Green." big shamrock, go green above it on her back. What does it mean? Look, dude, I don't know. I don't know if it means something. I don't know if it's nothing. I mean, all it says, I love snuggles from this feisty 2-year-old. I mean, yes, I've gone to the fact of we're doing with this. It doesn't say anything about the Celtics. It doesn't say anything about anything related to those things. But in this era of parsing words and putting little crumbs together to try to figure out the big picture, it's at least somewhat interesting. And in the words of CNC Music Factory, it's one of those things that make you go,
Well, let me ask you this, too. How many pictures went up? Just the go green? Because it is curious timing if you consider the fact that people in, New England, this whole Miami rumor has everybody nervous.
Absolutely. And okay, and so now I've just gone back to her page and the picture's gone. She deleted the picture from it. Yeah, it's gone. Yep, it's all gone.
See, now I remember the first thing I said to you when you brought this up was that if Gordon comes, and not just because of this picture, I just mean generally speaking, you almost wonder if there wouldn't be tampering charges. But how quickly that removed, obviously somebody is concerned about it, right? Somebody's got to be, because that should be an innocuous picture.
It should be, but, it's there, man. It's there. It happened. We were there. We saw it, it's like Kofefe, it might have been an accident, but we were all there. We all witnessed it. We were all witnesses. I don't know. There's so much this time of year that you can't ascribe anything to, right? Like, you can't be put all your faith in it, but weird stuff inevitably seems to turn into something. The other thing we haven't talked about is that Hayward's agent is Mark Bartelstein. And as I do, being a Celtics fan and really covering the team pretty intensely from 07, 08, a lot of Bartelstein's guys were the guys who filled in this roster. Posey, Eddie House. Throughout that time, Ainge and Bartelstein had a really close relationship that allowed guys to go back and forth and get guys here, and he made some solid decisions for some of Bartelstein's guys. I feel like that's the unspoken part of this conversation. We always focused on the fact that Gordon and Brad obviously were together there at Butler. But I think the Ainge-agent relationship also holds a lot of sway here as well. So I think that's something we need to talk about probably as we get a little bit closer to July 1. But it's all happening, man. It's all happening.
So what?
Of course, also,
what are they going to do? What's that?
I have one other important notice. Celtics blog. Our good friend Jeff Clark says probably the most important thing out of this. He says, I think, because I said, what does it all mean? Jeff says, I think it means that the internet needs to get a life. So just to bring us all down, thank you, Jeff, for that. Good stuff.
Brutal. But he's right. He's right. But at the same time, where there's smoke, there's fire. We already had the Bartelstein connection all nailed down. That was a legitimate sort of... Well, let me ask you, when can they talk at all when Gordon is under contract with the agent? I understand that they can't communicate with the player, but maybe you know better than I do. Can't the agent talk to another organization in advance of free agency? Even 2 years ago. There's nothing that says Bartelstein and Danny can't talk about Gordon Hayward and express interest, right?
No, they're not allowed to talk. This is what happened with the Joe Smith situation back over a decade ago, when Glenn Taylor, it was Kevin McHale and Joe Smith's agent were talking about extension when they were unable to do so. Does that mean that conversations don't happen. I think we'd all be too naive to think that's the case, though. I think, but back channels now in this world of political back channels, I'm sure there are plenty of back channels and conversations that happen. And again, Bull Pet's article back in the late days of February near the trade deadline, I think is the most important comment in all this, and saying there's a reason, and other GMs noticing it too, saying there's a reason why Ainge feels confident about this cap space he has this summer. And I think it could go in another direction too. I think on the one hand, I think they feel good about Hayward's possibility, but I think they have some information on Blake Griffin too. And that's a name that's gotten a little bit more play here, not from, reporting sources, but from sources of folks really on Twitter, people discussing on Twitter and saying, maybe that's something that deserves a little bit more conversation. Bill Simmons talked quite a bit about that in his most recent podcast with, talking about the ideas of, is that something that the Celtics should be looking at? If they go on a short-term deal with big money, does that help get the Celtics to be competitive in that short window, but get them to 2020?
Yep.
I'm
in favor of. Even with the injuries, that is something that I would be short money, right? Where you don't sacrifice your ability to re-sign some of these draft picks. And there's lingering rumors that maybe Chris Paul doesn't stick around, right? So if Chris Paul doesn't stick around, you got to think Blake is either not sticking around or available in sign and trade. I mean, immediately Doc and the Clippers are in a very rough spot if Chris Paul doesn't stick around.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if Chris Paul's gone, he goes to the Spurs. You've got to. There is something to be said though about the fact of, that team might be better with one of them gone. There is I think a positive to be taken by one of them coming and being out of the picture in terms of how the team plays. The problem is that the Clippers really screwed up. They should have traded one of those two, and really Blake. They should have traded Blake last summer. They could have gotten something for him, reshaped the roster into a package that is built more around DeAndre's rim running and defensive skills. Perhaps someone was a bit more of a shooter from the forward position, and someone who was perhaps a better complement to Chris Paul's skills. There's a bit too much duplication with Blake and Chris in terms of the ability to run through the offense through them, and so it was never a great fit. And unfortunately, Doc lacked the cojones to actually do such a thing last summer when he really needed to. And I think it may have extended the life of his Clippers. And now he has a chance of losing both in free agency, which maybe no one would have thought possible, 18 months ago. But here we are.
So let me ask you this then. Gordon Hayward or Blake Griffin, and I'm going to preface it by saying that there are probably many fans, just based on the rebounding deficiencies and the fact that if we do sign big money free agent this summer, it really limits our ability to bring back anybody in the front court or fill in the roster with somebody who might be available that could help out with the rebounding woes and the shot blocking interior presence. But the injuries scare me. So, and not so much the age, but the injuries at that age are what scare me. Now, you present a scenario that I would be absolutely in favor of. Short money but big money for a guy like Blake, and then maybe that doesn't hamper the contract. Although Ryan Bernardoni did say that we might still be able to get Gordon Hayward on short money, maybe not quite as short as what you and I are talking about for Blake, but that once he hits that 10-year threshold, Gordon stands to make a lot more money, so maybe you could still get him on short money and sort of let the roster and the cap thing play itself out as well. Is it a no-brainer for you with Gordon Hayward? Because I don't think it is for everybody. It is for me. I don't think it is for everybody.
Yeah, you and I are probably as pro Gordon as you're going to find anywhere on the internet, I think, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you were really the first one on the show to bring up Gordon. I think specifically talking about moving the pick that became Jaylen Brown for the potential to get him a year early, or I guess a year and a half early at the last year's trade deadline. And we've talked about it. I was like, I don't know if I'd do it. And in the end, you got the 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 guy of your dreams there in Jalen, but we could get both, and that's the beauty of it, right? And to me, that's no question. You go for Hayward every day, no question. No injury history. A guy who's on an upward trend, who's gotten better and better and better every single year he's been in the league, and perhaps playing in an offense that's going to be better suited to his skills. In the league that we play, that this team plays in, and we're seeing it right now in the finals. You're seeing a team with two good bigs who can rebound and block shots and play traditional 5-man and 4-man roles in the league. And they're getting just, in large part, they're getting destroyed. Without the referees' help in Game 4, they're destroying Cleveland Cavaliers. They are being destroyed by the Golden State Warriors. And of course, I'm talking about the Cavaliers. You need bigs. But you need to have 4s and 3s who can switch and rebound and pass and shoot. You need versatility. That's the key, right? And Gordon Hayward allows you to do that. Blake Griffin, sadly, hasn't made that leap. And athletically, due to the injuries largely, he's slowed. He's not the same freak of nature that we saw in the early days of Lob City. He needs to add a 3-point shot, and that would greatly help him. But he is a skilled passer. He's a great rebounder. I think defensively he's adequate and does what the Celtics would need. It would be a huge plus for these Celtics, particularly in playing against the Cleveland Cavaliers. But in the long run, I think I'd rather have Hayward on my team and try to find bigs that are a bit more flexible and athletic and can switch on the perimeter to a greater degree than really what we're seeing now with a more of a plotting team in the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think positional flexibility is something that we talked about, especially at the draft. I mean, at the trade deadline, as we were looking ahead to the draft, that's when the conversation really started to take some momentum on this show. And as we head to the break, I will say that's really where we need to come off. There was an article on Celtics blog, since you mentioned Jeff, saying, would you trade next year's Brooklyn Nets pick with some unknowns there if you were going to get a top 5 pick this year? And I think it just depends on how the draft is playing out. That might be something that you consider, but maybe Josh Jackson is a player, when we talk specifically in regards to what you just said, is a guy that maybe you'd be willing to flip that, knowing that you create all that positional flexibility. So first, it's playoff season, and having the right players on the court will be the key to success. That sharp outside shooter or power rebounder can be the difference between winning and losing. Business isn't any different. Your company needs the right people to be the best. So where do you go to find top talent? You can't find the best candidates by posting your job on just one site. You need to post on all the top job sites, and now you can with ZipRecruiter. At ZipRecruiter.com, you can post your job to over 100 job sites with just one click. Then their powerful technology efficiently matches the right people to your position. That's why ZipRecruiter is different. Unlike other job sites, ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them. In fact, over 80% of jobs posted on ZipRecruiter get a qualified candidate in just 24 hours. No juggling emails or calls to the office. Simply screen, rate, and manage candidates all in one place with ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use dashboard. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by businesses of all sizes nationwide. And right now, our listeners can start forming their own winning team on ZipRecruiter for free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/sportsfan. That's ZipRecruiter.com/sportsfan. Again, try it for free today at ZipRecruiter.com/sportsfan. Okay, so we spent the first half of the show talking about free agency, but the draft is really what's coming up. And despite the fact that it really does not hold a whole lot of mystery for Celtics fans, sure, I suppose there's a chance, a very small chance, sort of like the Cleveland Cavaliers coming back from a 3-0 deficit for a second year in a row type of chance, that the Celtics wouldn't take Markelle Fultz. But before we kind of debate that, would you trade next year's pick for another top 5 pick, let's just talk about some of the events of the past week, because we see that Fultz makes his visit, he's in town. And then there's the whole ESPN doing a photo shoot with Markelle, and we got to dive into that a little bit because despite the fact that there really is no mystery, they're certainly not helping make it any mystery either. It seems like they're very much locked in on this guy, and when you know how much not only did the Celtics sort of feel comfortable in saving for their money for free agency this offseason, you know that they really, really, really wanted that number 1 pick. And that's pretty crazy to say when you know how deep this draft is. A lot of good talent at the very top. So you have to think they've really been locked in on Fultz all along, and that when they did finally get that number 1 pick and they didn't drop to 5 or 4, that excitement, they're kind of letting it out of the bag a little bit, John.
I think so too. I mean, usually I see the great value in kind of going back and getting more value and, the Belichick approach, trade back 1 spot and get 45 future picks. I see that there's a clear gap right now between Fultz and everybody else, right? And, we talked a lot about Josh Jackson. We talked a lot about Tatum. Both of us were kind of down on Ball, and I still am. But boy, man, I mean, you look at where we were, in that playoff series, and just not enough guys who can put the ball on the floor and get to the basket or get the shot off, create offense for themselves and others. I mean, Markelle Fultz checks all those boxes and more, and it's a need. It's a future potential. There are potentials in a lot of those guys, in those top 5 guys, going down to De'Aaron Fox included probably in that. Monk could be a guy who could do something. Isaac. I mean, there's a lot of guys who could star as they kind of go through their careers. But Fultz is the complete package. I mean, it's all right there. And again, I talked about Simmons' podcast yesterday, and I cringe to even give him credit on this, but he repeated a comment.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. Still blocked, by the way. Still blocked. Going on like 5 years, 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? It's crazy. The guy does not have thick skin. That's for certain. But Fultz, he talked with an NBA GM the other day who said, "This is who Fultz is. He's a shorter Tracy McGrady." And you're
wow.
Right.
Who could play point guard?
A point guard, right? And when McGrady came in, there was some talk that he would play point guard, but his size, just in that league at that time, that wasn't what was going to happen. But could do everything, and you don't turn down Tracy McGrady. There's a lot of guys who could be good, who could be all-stars, who could do a lot of things in this league. There's a lot of good in the top parts of this draft, but the difference between Markelle Fultz and 2 and 3 and 4, to me, you just can't trade. As Danny said at the end of the playoffs, we have a lot of good players. We need great players, and Markelle Fultz is a great player.
Yeah, he really is, and he's got the length, he's got the size, and we talked about earlier Isaiah Thomas and just the wear and tear. So if you hit a home run in free agency, and we're hoping that's Gordon Hayward, but you also go and take Fultz, it should take a serious pressure and scoring load off of Isaiah Thomas. And what was the big issue this season? Maybe not as bad even as last year, but that second unit scoring. So we kind of tried out Evan Turner, and he was the anchor. There was a lot of questions about how they were going to survive without him, despite sort of the shot selection and the fact that Brad made him a better player. We still discussed all season long who's going to be the guy to carry that second unit. We looked at Kelly Olynyk. We looked at Marcus Smart. Obviously, Jaylen Brown wasn't ready. But somebody like Markelle Fultz, if he's not starting, and even if he is, they'll stagger it so that there is some sort of scoring punch on that second unit.
That's it. I mean, and they were looking at Rozier to do that, and it's unfortunate because I thought Rozier had a good season at the end, but he never made the leap that I think we all thought he would. We thought the way he played in the playoffs was the way he'd played the entire season. So it was a bit disappointing to see that season out of Terry Rozier. Now you're going to bring in a guy like Markelle Fultz who can do it all. maybe doesn't have the kind of quick twitch athleticism that a guy like Rozier has, but the gifts are just plentiful. And I'm not saying that Rozier is going to get pushed out, because I think there's a lot of things that could happen in this backcourt, including, just about everybody. But, there's no question. You put Markelle Fultz and what he can do in that second spot, even with 2 less years on the job training, there's no question that team, that second unit's going to be better placed to win games.
And the kid can shoot. Like, I know
right.
Maybe they say, oh, well, not the NBA 3, maybe, there's always that question mark going from college to the pros. Nobody's going to shoot 5 steps behind the line on a consistent basis in college. But honestly, his shot is so smooth. I really don't think, if there is an adjustment, it's going to be a minor one. It certainly won't be, let's start him in the corner the way that they did with Jaylen Brown. Let's get Jaylen to a point where he can hit the open corner 3. Then we'll let him kind of expand his shot selection, from outside, from deep outside. And I think with Markelle, he's going to know his spots, even if he takes a couple of deep twos while he's sort of adjusting to the NBA game. But what do you think he's going to be working on all summer? It's absolutely going to be adjusting to that NBA three-point line. We've seen him do a bunch of trick shots, so that he's kind of capable of doing some sort of interesting things, and he can adapt what he does and sort of read the court. I really don't think that hitting that deep NBA 3 is going to be, if it is a struggle, it's only going to be an early one. By the end of the season, I think he'd have it figured out. But I think, one of the things with him too is really what we've been talking about, positional flexibility. He can play the 1 and the 2. He's probably long enough to play the 3 in a pinch. He can distribute the ball. He can score. And even if, and we heard a lot about this, the defense, and I know Celtics blog had a really nice article about how, hey, listen, with everything he was required to do, and you look at his length, he's not going to be the defensive liability that you all think he is. So what if he is? I really think that this team could suffer that. That'll be the difference between whether or not he gets into the starting lineup, if he is consistently generating offense. But think about how much less attention he's going to receive next season. Despite being the number 1 overall pick, he is going to have so much more room to create. Remember what we said about Jaylen Brown and his transition. The guy is a north-south, attack the rim kind of player. Now, he needs some work even in that regard still. But one of the things that really benefited Jaylen was the spacing on the floor this season. Don't think that Markelle Fultz won't have the same luxury. And let's also take it a step further and say he's smoother going to the paint and attacking the basket, and he's more likely to knock the outside shot to get some respect. With those two things, combined with the fact that the floor is much more open in the NBA, I don't consider defense or the three-point shot a real legitimate concern on his ability to impact this team next season. I think he gets 20 minutes a game, easy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's exactly the spot that you peg him for. And, the question there is what happens elsewhere in the wings, at the shooting guard spot, they're going to try to keep Isaiah under 30 or around 30. And certainly he's less than that, probably to even start the year. So, Fultz is your guy to, at least probably average throughout the year 20. But, you've got 48 minutes right there. There's your point guard minutes. Who's your 2? Or do you kick Fultz to 2 and have somebody run the show, let him play a little bit off the ball, try to get used to those skills? That's one thing that we saw with the development of Smart, I think was a bit troubling, and we talked quite a bit this year. When you have to do so many different things, it's hard to be really good at one thing. And Smart this year, it really finally made that leap in terms of his ability of running a team and making the right passes and making the right reads and setting his teammates up. It was in him, but he was playing small forward, and he was being shooting guard, and he was being the team stopper when Bradley wasn't in, and doing all these things, spot up shooter, doing all these things and not really doing what I think is in his skill set. So I'm hopeful that there'll be a little bit more roster sanity so that then Ainge can kind of line things up and be like, okay, look, Brown, you stay in this role, you're going to play in this role, get better at what you're doing, and then move on to the next thing. And same with Fultz. I think that's been a bit troubling for this team. And, it's hard to tell a guy to go work on something when you're putting him in a game and you need him to do 5 other things because that's what the team needs to win. It's really the cross purposes of developing a player while also trying to win at the same time. It's a challenging thing this team has done. It's worked so well with Brown, maybe not quite as well with Rozier, and I think with Smart it's probably a bit mixed.
Well, and they're going to wind up with a bunch of small lineups. So despite the fact that I was kind of calling for Brown to play the 2, and then I thought he did very well. Probably his best stretch of the season was playing the 2 with Avery Bradley out in the starting lineup. But in this case, you land Gordon Hayward and you get Markelle Fultz. Minutes at the 2 without any kind of movement is pretty much never going to happen for Jaylen Brown in that scenario. And even with the addition of Gordon Hayward, it makes minutes at the 3 pretty limited if you're holding on to Jay Crowder. So Jay, you almost have to look at it like what you were just kind of lining up at the guard spot is to say, okay, veteran Isaiah at point guard, Fultz is backup. Veteran at shooting guard is Bradley, and Marcus Smart is backup. And we know Marcus kind of moves over to the 1 as well, so maybe him and Fultz are interchangeable. Then you go over to the 3. Veteran Hayward is the starter at the 3, and Brown, the rookie, is the backup. And now you're looking at Crowder, and he's basically a 4 in every small ball lineup. And occasionally, depending on how they do the substitutions, Jaylen Brown is kind of picking up that 4 spot like we saw him more so, I guess, at the beginning of the season, but a little bit in the playoffs as well in small ball lineups. That's kind of how I see all of that shaking out. There's still some room, but then what happens to a guy like Terry Rozier? Because if you're taking those 48 minutes and you're saying they're 30 and 18 or 28 and 20, it's getting pretty thin. Somebody like Rozier finds himself on the outside unless you trade Avery Bradley.
And that's, I think, what you and I are both wanting or called for, I think, is that deal to send Bradley out, open up the space for everybody. And I think the other thing that we haven't really talked about on the Avery Bradley trade is that he played so well, or at least probably in contrast to what the numbers say, according to Sam and Ryan and others who are looking at it from an analytical sense, that the eye test says that Bradley played a tremendous playoff series. His trade value should never be higher at this point. Yes, he's a free agent to be, but I think a lot of teams feel like they can get him for a good price. And I would, what does that mean for the Celtics to be able to add something elsewhere in their roster? Yes, they have to take a significant pay cut in what they get back just so they can get that cap space they need to sign Hayward or whomever. But that little bit does add somebody, whether it's talk about Robert Covington, who's a guy that Bernardoni talked about, maybe Rashawn Holmes as a big guy. I mean, again, the part of the problem that I see with this roster going into next year is that, let's say you do sign Hayward, instead of being that team that brings in its second unit that really can kind of whitewash the other teams, as we saw really going along with attacking, whether it's the Bulls or going after the Wizards and most of these teams, it was the second unit that really pushed them through. Now you're going to have an even younger second unit coming into the game. You got Brown, you got Fultz, you've got Yabusele maybe. Maybe Zizic. I mean, there's a lot of questions and not a lot of veteran depth. And so adding that guy who you get back for Bradley is going to be key. This could be the sixth, seventh person on this team coming in. Let's
say Blake Griffin picks up his option. Can you pull enough salary together with Jay Crowder and Avery Bradley to go get that player in a move? Because if, let's say, like you said, somebody's got to go from that Clippers roster, that's a great way for them to stay young and keep somebody like DeAndre, who's also young, and shed a little bit of that concern. Like, let's say Chris Paul leaves. Can you package enough salary on this roster, or is there just not enough money there if you sign Gordon Hayward? And I'm only talking about 1 year rental, right? I know long term,
right,
to Bernardoni's point, we'll be totally in trouble with cap space in that regard. It'll really hurt. Yeah. But I just mean for next season only. Let's say Griffin only picks up his option and then they decide to make kind of a move. Can you really is there enough salary on this roster to do that?
Well, here's the biggest question is Tyler Zeller. Okay, so he's owed $8 million next year. He is the Celtics have to I believe they have until July 3rd to release him from his contract without being tied into that money into next year.
But if they don't let him go, they can't get Hayward, correct?
Right. So they're going to have to know within the first couple days if they're in the Hayward sweepstakes or if Griffin's out. So I suppose if Griffin stays and Hayward's out, maybe they keep Tyler Zeller using him as an expiring contract.
But they couldn't do both, right? You couldn't take enough players that are remaining on this roster with Bradley and Crowder to make it happen. I mean, I'm talking everybody's on the table. Rozier's on the table. Maybe you've gutted the roster to some extent, but kept the core pieces of youth, meaning Fultz and Brown and Smart. Is there a way to pull that off, or is there just I don't know what his number is if he picks up his option. Do you know?
At $21 million.
Yeah, there's no way.
Yeah, Eric
they can't even get half the way there with Crowder and Bradley.
Yeah, you'd have to send out. I mean, let's assume you send out Bradley. Well, I guess you wouldn't have to send out Bradley if you didn't. You're saying they don't get Hayward, or you're saying they do get Hayward?
They do get Hayward.
All right,
and so then they say, okay, the roster's unbalanced. Let's take 1 year on Griffin. Let's throw in Bradley and Crowder. That gets us starting. Can we get to the 125% point or whatever?
Yeah, so you'd have to get to
17.
So you got So the problem is that you have to get to the 17 because you have to get $4 million less. So let's say you send Bradley, Crowder, Smart.
What's the gap from there?
So if you send Bradley and Crowder,
you're at 12.
So that's 6-8 and 8-8. So 14, 15-8. Yeah, you could do it. You could if you send Crowder, Bradley, and Smart out, you could get Brown. You could get him back. Now
you've got to do Smart, huh?
You got to do Smart or Brown, or yeah.
Not two other pieces.
You could do it with Rozier. Actually, you could do it with Rozier. You could do Rozier.
You could do it with Rozier.
Yeah, you could Rozier, Crowder. If the 25% works, hold on. I'll do the trade checker. This is so.
I mean, I'm not trying to. I know this is way out there, silly, but this is what this time of year is kind of all about.
It is.
I'm just sitting here thinking about it, and I'm thinking, if Chris Paul leaves, what a great way for that team to kind of get a little re-energized, get a little young, and maybe they at least stay healthy in that. And you still have guys in their prime. I mean, Bradley's no slouch. It's just the roster crunch here and the way that the Celtics are being put together.
So it works, okay? It does work. If you
have to give the Clippers their pick back in a couple of years.
You could, but I think you're probably. I mean, he's an expiring deal. So here's what you've given up, though, right? You've given up cost-controlled Terry Rozier. You've given up cost-controlled Jay Crowder for the potential of having to sign Blake Griffin to a max deal next year.
I'm actually thinking you let him go anyway. Already got cap issues, right? Already got cap issues. Already too small. Already going to lose something, probably and not get a premium return. You're already there. Why not run to a guy like Griffin and hope that you get the one healthy year out of the next 4 and really take a charge? The most valuable thing for these young players, a Fultz, a Brown, and a Smart, is that they know what it takes to perform in the postseason when the reins get handed over. You cannot undervalue what postseason experience means to these guys and how it sets a tone for what they really need to be doing in the offseason and how they need to approach their game year after year after year to be ready for when they're on that big stage. I'm not saying guys like superstars shouldn't already know how to do that, But I'm just saying, as some of these young guys develop, one of the biggest advantages for their development and growth in the NBA is the fact that this team was first in the East. They're about to add a ton of young talent. Putting them in the postseason gives you the best chance for making this better and better year after year. Does it get them over Cleveland if they get Hayward and Griffin? I don't know, but it certainly makes them pretty intense. It makes them pretty darn intense, even with Zizic starting at center because we've gutted the roster. But then I think
it's interesting.
You let Blake go.
Yeah.
Why not take the gamble? What if they got a championship next season out of that some crazy, wacky, wild way, and then they let Griffin go and they take a step back a little bit, but these young players begin to emerge as they approach their third year, and they're battle tested in the post.
So, but the problem is, and I hear you, but the problem is you're losing two assets for nothing.
We might anyway.
But not with Crowder and Rozier. I mean, those guys are cost controlled for 3 years or 4 years respectively.
But so they still take up room on the cap when you're trying to re-sign.
Yeah, but you're going to replace
Thomas
rotation
and all
players.
Of that.
Yeah, but you're getting rid of rotation players, so you're going to end up being just like the Clippers, whereas you have your all-stars and not much else. That's why the Celtics.
No, because you still have the young players. That's the difference. They don't. But the Clippers don't have young players. Yes, but he's not.
But you can't.
But he's not part of the core, dude. Listen,
but what do young players give you, though? I mean, let's look at the young players in this league. You got the Minnesota Timberwolves. Everyone's like, they're a young team. They're up and they're coming, right? 76ers, up and coming. Everybody's on their rookie contracts. But they're not good teams.
But what are you going to get for Avery Bradley? Are you just trying to stockpile more picks so that you can cost control more in the future? Or are you not even worried about that?
Player. I think you got to get a rotation player and a future pick. I think that's the goal.
But see, the rotation player that you add still presents issues around salary.
All you need to worry about, though, is getting enough to sign Hayward, and that someone who's cost controlled for a period of time, whether it's 1 year, 2 year. Covington's only a 1 year deal, so you're swap. Basically, you're getting the pick for the right to sign Hayward, but you're also creating space in your rotation too. I don't think that
you're creating a ton of space in your
one is the same. I think that's too much.
You're 1 year of Blake Griffin for Jay Crowder, Avery Bradley, and Terry Rozier. Creates space in the rotation, solves your issues at the four, and this is provided. The major caveat that debunks a lot of this is that Blake just picks up his option and rides one more year. Based on how he finished the season, you might still see that happening instead of him opting out, but I don't know. Maybe he opts out. We'll see. But if that were to be the case, renting him for 1 year, so what if you don't get picks back? This team is already loaded with draft picks that will keep them cost controlled in the future. They're already going to have these young players that are on the team that are going to need to get paid as soon as this current staple of veterans comes up. These issues don't go away. They compound. So my point is, if all you're going to do is keep compounding future salary, why not make a big swing rental this season and then just solve the problem? And now you know that cap is going to be manageable even with Hayward on it. Avery Bradley has already been in discussions on this show since before the trade deadline of the fact that he's a great player, really solid, lifelong Celtic. We just don't know how we're going to pay him. We really can't pay him. And you don't think Jay Crowder is going to fall into that at some point? He will at some point. So why not open up the space so that you can re-sign? Marcus Smart's another one that's on that question mark list, right? Because you got to sign Smart and Isaiah. What was the core theme of the discussion with Ryan Bernardoni last week? It was we might still not even if we do all of these things, we still might not be able to sign Isaiah Thomas. You still might have question marks in that regard.
That's right, but moving two guys who are going to be cost controlled doesn't help you with that. It only worsens the problem of saying you're not going to be able to be competitive and you're going to have that issue.
But that's where I disagree, because I think the roster's already loaded. You're going to have these young players clamoring for minutes, and they don't have the wear and tear on their body. They should be the ones to do it. You only need, listen, no, think about this real quick, right? Yeah. You got 5 starters. Let's say you get Hayward, and I know we're going down pipe dream, alley right now, right? Yeah. But you'd have Isaiah, Smart, I guess, or Fultz. Isaiah, Fultz, Hayward, Griffin, Zizic, and then you'd still have Brown coming off the bench, the draft pick next year. You'd still, who's the guy we drafted in the second round? Nader. You could still pick him up, and he would be cross-controlled. You've got Yabusele. How long are we going to stash some of these young players? You might as well get a little top-heavy while the young players emerge to a point where they deserve a contract.
And I'm okay with consolidating talent to do that. I'm just not okay with basically creating a cap problem for us by either re-signing whoever we're acquiring or creating a situation where the people that we're going to have to replace on the roster for these low-cost contracts are going to be worse non-rotation players or perhaps younger players who are less likely to be participants. I'm more concerned about having rotation players than youngers.
Your core issue is we're trading for Blake Griffin, and we're basically only going to get a single year out of him.
Yeah, exactly. I love if Blake Griffin was a core piece and was someone you're going to re-sign, okay, so just to flip it around, let's say you keep him. Let's say he has a great year. He's healthy. He has his trial year in Boston. And the Clippers get a package of players. It makes sense. It makes sense. That package of players makes a lot of sense for a number of reasons. Let's say that Isaiah isn't healthy and the hip just doesn't come around this year. Maybe you're dedicating that money to Blake Griffin and you're not dedicating money to Isaiah Thomas. Now, that's blasphemy. I get it. But there is a situation where you could look at that conversation and say, maybe it does make sense in another world of saying, well, let's take Griffin, and that way one out of the two of them, or both maybe,
it does increase your, it increases your odds of keeping the right player when that time comes without dropping off. And it gives you more people to make that decision around. Because you're right, Isaiah and Blake would come up at the same time if he just picked up his option and we made such a deal.
Yep. So that would be interesting. I think does Horford, Griffin, how do you work that front court out? That's a lot of questions there. You sign Hayward. You've got Isaiah, and then either Smart or Fultz or Brown or that fifth guy. That's a pretty good team. That's a team that can compete. I think that's a team you can sign some other minimum salary free agents to sign and play and compete. I think you can feel like you can give a charge into Cleveland, and a year from now, you have 2 max contract players potentially on the market at the same time that you could re-sign and go into cap hell. Or it doesn't work. It's an unmitigated disaster. And the worst part of it, though, and this is the part that I have a hard time with it, is you have the potential of both assets walking away for nothing. And that would be a pretty hard pill to swallow for Danny Ainge, given all that they do to maximize the absolute most out of every asset they have. It seems like that's an un-Ainge-like maneuver. But maybe it's a Belichick maneuver, and they say we can get more out of not signing these players and having players fill in their places than we are by re-signing them and committed those dollars long term. Doesn't seem like an NBA type decision, but it's possible.
Well, we just burned up a ton of time with that unanticipated trip down, crazy lane, but maybe we actually got some meat and potatoes out of it some way. 'Cause I like the way you wrap that up. And so we have to wrap the show, but I am going to say we promised to have this one quick debate. So let's pretend next year's pick, you never know what can happen with the Brooklyn Nets. Would you move it for a top 5 pick? And my answer immediately is no, not just randomly for a top 5 pick, but maybe we spin it another way and put it back to you, John, and then we'll close out the show in a minute. But what if there is a way, or is there any other player in the top 5 that if they fell to whenever said pick became available, right? You could say number 2 is available in a swap, which it's not, but let's pretend, it doesn't matter. Just, is there another player in this draft that you would like to get your hands on, even at the expense of next year's Brooklyn Nets pick?
No. Not when the potential exists that could be number 1. And whether it's Doncic or Porter or there's a number of guys that you could take next year. I don't see the value in trying to do that. I think that the Celtics pick next year might be somebody you'd look at, and there may be a guy in the late lottery who is exciting for you, but right now the Celtics don't need players on their roster. They need assets, and they need assets who are not on their salary right now. So not only would signing somebody or trading for a second first rounder mean one more player you have to fit into the minutes situation, but you're gonna have to allocate $3, $4, $5 million to that person when you're already short $4 million that you need to sign Hayward. So you need $8 million. It just doesn't make any sense at this point. I'd love it. I love the idea of it, but I think when you have the chance to get the number 1 pick next year, and the guys that are there available there, I think you just have to wait and play it out as you did this year.
Well, and you talk about cost controlling players. Definitely spacing that out one additional year for when all these players come up to be re-signed is also pretty important. So I think there's some validity there. One last question. The Sacramento rumors about working out Fultz. They have picks 5 and 10. I think it's extremely, we've already said we don't think there's any chance. The Celtics have locked in on Fultz. But do you think there's any truth to the rumors that Fultz might go and work out for them? I mean, that could be an agent favor kind of thing. They want to compare him to another player and see how big the gap is, right? Depending on relationships.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I don't think that Fultz, is he going to talk to them? Maybe not play for them, but talk to them. I think that's possible. I think that the Kings seem to be trying to turn over a new leaf. And so I'm looking at more in that realm as opposed to suggesting that there's legitimate interest. There's really no package that the Sacramento Kings could offer that would possibly allow for 5 and 10 to move up to 1. And I can't even see a package where 5 and 10 get them number 2. So maybe 5 and 10 get them to 3, but how exactly does Philly make a Godfather offer that gets them the number 1 pick, and why wouldn't they take Fultz themselves? So there's a lot of questions in the logic of it. I do think that of all the teams that are in the lottery, I think Philly does have the goods to make a deal with Boston that could allow them to give up the number 1 pick. But I think Philly would
What
be
would
crazy
that
to
look
do
like?
it. Well,
Because if you say Embiid, I'm not interested.
Well, I would say Embiid would be 1. I'd say Ben Simmons would be 2. I'm not saying the same deal. Those are one of those 2 would have to be in the deal. The Lakers pick next year, and of course number 3. That's a pretty expensive cost for that pick, and I don't think they'd do something like that. It just, there's no reason for them to do it, But Fultz is the guy they need, that oddly enough. He's the guy that kind of would let everything work there. And that he comes to Boston is just, oh geez, I feel terrible for them.
It's true. It's true. And the Brooklyn Nets need whatever they can get, so you have to feel terrible for them too.
Oh yeah, just completely destroyed about such things. There's a chance they could be good next year. Not good, better than they were this year. They could be on that list. I'm not seeing it right now. I think they're still going to be a top five worst team, no matter if they sign a couple guys this summer or not. So if that's the case, we're still in the mix for Doncic and Porter and everybody else. So I'm not at all concerned that we're somehow going to be holding on to a late lottery pick next year. It's not going to happen.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this week's show. We're going to be back next week. It'll be right before the draft. Then we're going to have the live draft show. John, myself, Bobby Manning going to be there. We'll probably all be shuffling the deck throughout the night a little bit. We've been known to do some really long shows, but timing, details, etc. We'll be putting that out here in the next couple of days to let everybody know. We'll line up our usual set of excellent guests to be able to talk to you and take us through the night. And you never know what'll happen. I'm pretty sure it'll be Fultz, but there's a chance Danny trades in and moves around, and there's a lot of future assets if they've got other players they're eyeballing. What I really want to know, John, is over the next several days is, do they wind up working out some other players that look to go maybe in the mid-first round? That will be sort of intriguing as we get a little bit closer to the draft. But that's going to do it for this week's show. It will be available on demand on the CLNS Radio mobile app and clnsradio.com. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at CSL_Justin. John is at CSL_Duke. Big thanks to everybody for tuning in. You can support the show by subscribing to Celtic Stuff Live on iTunes and Stitcher. Don't forget, give us a rating and a review. Your feedback is extremely important to us. And a reminder, today's show brought to you by ZipRecruiter.com. They have a great deal for all of you listeners, but most importantly, you would be supporting our show and the entire network. Big thanks for the whole loyal audience of CLNS Media, making it all worthwhile, and for staff writer Samuel Elias, executive producer Larry H. Russell, the founder of CLNS Radio Nick Gelso, and my co-host John Duke. I'm Justin Poulin. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of Celtic Stuff Live.
Celtic Stuff Live.